Hello, everybody. How are you? It's nice to see you all. Now, it was nice to see Diego on screen here. We practiced a couple days ago. And as I introduced him, I was trying to think back, when was the first time I saw him? Well, I was in Colombia about a year ago, about 13 months ago. And we were at Diego, do you remember Valentina's Hotel in Manizales? And so we were in there, and Rosemary and I were talking to this young lady named Carolina, and you walked in the door, and Carolina whispered to us, and she said, "Oh, that man, he's the most famous man. He's the most famous man in Colombia." And I said, "Well, who is it?" She said, "Oh, that's Diego Calderón. He is so smart. He is so handsome. I'd really like to meet him." And I thought, well, let's go meet him then. And so we walked over and we introduced ourselves, and Carolina almost swooned. She almost fainted. She was so excited to meet you. So anyway, we got to know you, and we went birding a couple times together, and then we saw your presentation. And I didn't know much of your history, but I knew you're some biologist bird guy in Colombia. And then I found out about your experience with the FARC. And then I found out that what you did after that was you started a bird, one of the first bird watching companies in Colombia, and you've been doing that for about 20 years. And you lead people all over in several different places. And the work that you've done with the people that live out in the jungles has been remarkable. And when I heard your presentation, I looked around. There were 400 or 500 people at that presentation, and they were all in tears. And they gave you a standing ovation. I thought, wow, this guy has really touched the heart of the nation of Colombia. So I thought we definitely have to have him come as a speaker. So with no more talking from me, Diego, tell us a little bit about your story and about your country and about your beautiful birds.
Well, thank you.
By the way, right before that, if anybody has a question at the very end, we will ask questions. But all of you are muted, of course, so you can't interrupt the conversation. But if you have a question, write your question in the chat. Now, if you look down in the bottom in the chat, I put Diego's official introduction in there because there wasn't anything about Carolina in there. So I just put your official description in the chat. If anybody wants to ask Diego a question, write that question to me, Chris Cameron, and then we will ask Diego at the end. Okay, so Diego, it's all you. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Chris, mate. It's great to see you and Rosemary, of course. Both, thank you very much for setting all this up, and everyone that is taking a little bit of time of their daily life to one of these Zoom presentations. I'm actually very humbled by your presentation, mate. Thank you very much. It was actually, I do remember, when we meet with Caro at the hotel in Manizales, and we got a great event that year, especially, since we've been living these crazy years of COVID, and, like being able to kind of get back to see people and being in touch with people is always great. So thank you very much, actually, all of you for attending tonight. And, as I always say to the people that attends and listens to this talk, to this presentation, I invite you to get a little out of your bubbles, out of your comfort zones for a little bit less than an hour with me, as I talk you a little bit about the history of Colombia and my personal history there. So I'm going to start sharing here the screen, and please, you should all be watching right now my full screen. If that's not the case for any reason, just interrupt me and let me know. Yeah, that should be good. So basically the title of this presentation is Birding with FARC, and a new subtitle, kind of a sequel, is How Birds Connect People. Many of you might not know what is FARC or like that, so I'm just gonna give you a little bit of an introduction here to start with. So basically, Colombia is located on the equator, on this tropical line of the equator, that is responsible for a lot of the biodiversity of the world. And one important thing is that it's Colombia with O, not Colombia. That is like a common mistake that a lot of people does. But yeah, no worries about that. Just let's keep birding, you know. And then the magic of Colombia is that it's located on the equator, and the equatorial line, you know, that is shared in between several African, Asian, and Latin American countries, allow us to have an amazing diversity. We have a plethora, a lot of different habitats, you know, rocky outcrops from the Guyanese Shield. We have amazing Amazon rivers. We got all this lush lower elevation jungle, the tropical llanos that, you know, the Eastern llanos is a lowland marsh, huge lowland marsh, second in size in Latin America only after the Pantanal that we share with Venezuela, that has a lot of unique species, tropical jungles in the high elevation mountains, a lot of cloud forest, of course, and all these, you know, all these different habitats that I'm showing you right now. Of course, they all harbor different, you know, diversity, different endemic plants, different endemic animals, a lot of birds, of course. We are #1 in birds of the world. We almost have 2,000 species. And we have around 80 endemic species of birds. These are paramos, like the most highest elevation, almost 5,000 meters above sea level, something in between, like above 12,000 feet. You have these specialized plants that, you know, have some endemic hummingbirds and stuff. This is a paramo landscape. So all these biodiversity that we have, because we are #1 in orchids and #1 in birds, and all those superlatives, you know, are probably very good to sell the country to visiting tourists. You know, that is a fair thing to say. But, you know, all these superlatives only talk and are only, you know, like possible because Colombia is a very tangled country, because it has a lot of different, you know, elevations, different microhabitats, different mountain ranges. And all this diversity is, I mean, is not only reflected on all our habitats, on all our mountains, on all our rivers, on all our, you know, ecological aspects, as shown here by this slide that shows you the hotspots of biodiversity in the world. These red areas are basically, you know, the hot areas where most of the highest numbers of biodiversity is clustered around the world, you know, like New Zealand, the Western Ghats in India, a lot of the Horn of Africa, some of the areas of the Mediterranean even. But if you look in Colombia, I mean, if you think on the amount of territory of Colombia, is almost all shaded in red. So we are covered by very different hotspots. We have an influence of the Caribbean hotspot, the Mesoamerica or Middle America, and also the Chocó, the tropical Andes. So the diversity of hotspots that we have in Colombia is the main secret behind our huge diversity. But Colombia is not being only diverse in animals and plants and nature and habitats. Colombia is also being diverse and, if you allow me to call it, colorful, you know, in not a good way, but a, you know, diverse way, also in cultural and social history. We've been, you know, one of the countries with the longest armed conflict, you know, internal armed conflict, running all the way from, you know, the early 50s, almost like 60 years of an internal war, if we want to call it, and have had a lot of different participants, a lot of different angles, different guerrilla groups like left-wing Marxist guerrillas, and also a lot of right-wing paramilitary groups. We also got the government. Of course, the government has been involved also not only in proper, okay things, but also in very improper things with the right, with the left. So it's been very tangled too. It's been a history of diverse problems. And one of the cool things that we Colombians been living in the last decade probably is that around, you know, the mid 2010s, in 2014, 15, a lot of Colombians went to the streets, took the streets, and were basically rioting and protesting and marching, expressing our total discomfort with, you know, 50 years of governments not being able to get to a, you know, end of a civil conflict. You know, a lot of Colombians were totally disagreeing with all this conflict that is being displacing people, is being kidnapping people, is being killing a lot of innocent people. And of course, in several other aspects, is not allowed, you know, international tourism coming, developing, going to some areas. So it's been, if you think, it's been for a lot of people even, you know, like 4 or 5 decades of non-stop conflict. And then the people took to the streets, and basically, fortunately, for us, for this country, and even, for the world, in 2016, we, as a country, we signed a peace deal with FARC. FARC stands for Fuerzas Armadas Revolucionarias de Colombia. That is, used to be the oldest guerrilla group in the world, started in the 50s and created and boosted all this conflict in Colombia for, 60 years kind of thing. And we came to an agreement with them. And this image that I'm showing you here is super powerful, because this is an ex-guerrilla guy, an ex-guerrilla member, an ex-combatant on the signing of the peace deal, holding a white flag with a pigeon and a little peace flag. And this just shows how all these other guys, like our enemies of the country, they were also victims of all this conflict. We got basically around 10,000 combatants. We got them out of the field. They signed the peace deal. And if you think from these 10,000 combatants that, are ex-combatants now, a lot of them were also victims. They were forced to, join the army of FARC, of these guerrillas, sometimes, forced by the situation, sometimes because they didn't have any more options. But at the end, a very high percentage of these combatants were fighting there just by no other reason than having no more opportunities than war, than conflict. So basically, 2016 saw us living this, signing the peace deal, the peace agreement with FARC, ending the longest civil conflict, armed civil conflict in any country in the world. We were, for 60 years living on mayhem about, this internal war. So how myself and how do I relate to this conflict? Well, this is the area where I grew up. This is Urabá. This is the cloud forest in the border with Panama. I was born here in Medellin, in the Central Andes. It's the second largest city in Colombia. But when I was like 8 years old, I moved to Urabá with my parents and my sister. And this was actually a very tough area in the day. This is 1988 that we moved there. And I remember a lot of violence in this area, going on. There was a lot of good economics and money, and that's the area where the bananas are planted for exportation from Colombia. So there was a lot of interest in this area from many sides of the conflict. And actually, even my father was kidnapped in 1989, I think, for a couple of weeks by one of the small guerrilla groups living in the area. It was one of the, let's say, customary kidnappings that were more commercial in the day. My father used to run like a beer and soda small company, local company, and these groups wanted some bribes, security bribes, and they were negotiating, and he was held hostage for almost a couple of weeks. He was kidnapped in this area. So this is in the Western Andes, and I basically did my primary and my secondary school. And what happened is that I moved to Medellin in the year 1998 to come and start my undergrad. I started actually in the year 2000, my undergrad in biology, and these were the forests where I was training as a biology student. I was doing my research and my birding in this area. I started birding actually in the year 2000, 23 years ago when I started doing biology. And these forests were absolutely full of surprises, guys. I can tell you, if you see this slide, the bird there in the left is, it's a photograph of the chestnut-capped pigeon. And the illustration in the right is the original illustration of the description of the bird. This thing was published in 2001. So you can imagine, I started studying biology and I went to the field with the older, friends, with the older colleagues, with the older chaps, and they were describing new species to science. This was living the dream. This was living the Victorian times of exploration, as we are still doing in Colombia, finding new species, describing it, describing them as new to science. And this was one species that I had the privilege to help on the description, to go and take notes in the field when this thing didn't have a name. And, a lot of us here on this meeting today are birders, or we are connected with nature anyhow. If you see a bird that doesn't fit, that is not in the book, you get this weird feeling that you're discovering something. This was very exciting for us. And, there were in those same forests, there were birds like the multicolored tanager that, what else do you need to get boosted and to get keen on visiting these areas than beautiful birds, undescribed birds. But I have to tell you, at the same time that we were on our little camp, setting mist nets, working with these birds, finding new species for science, this is the landscape that we could see from the top of the mountain. These were guys from a right-wing paramilitary group that were patrolling, illegally in the area. And this was the life that we all biology students in my time and 50 years behind, we have to affront, we have to leave. And to get to these areas, we were very young students, 20-year-old guys. We had to ask for permission to illegal groups and explain to them, like, hey, we are doing this research, we are doing some bird exploration, some plant exploration, and we need your permission. So this tells you a little bit of the daily life that we have to affront back in the day. And I'll show you where I grew up in the Western Andes, then where I started birding in the Central Andes, and basically this story moves to the Eastern Andes. Colombia has 3 different ranges of the Andes, and this is the Eastern Andes. This is actually this photo is in the most septentrional, the northernmost section of the Eastern Andes in all South America that we share with Venezuela. If you go to the right of the slide, to the very right, that slope there is already Venezuela. And if you look to the left of this photo, you would see all the Caribbean. So this is like the very last tip of the end of the Andes. And this is a beautiful mountain called Cerro Pintado, the painted mountain, the painted peak, because it has like karstic, red stain, beautiful walls. And it's an area that when I was studying biology in 2004, I was interested in, with some friends, to go and explore, because a couple of birds, a couple of species, really interesting birds, were living in this mountain but were lost to science, basically. This is one of them, the Perijá thistletail. It's a brown ovenbird type, one of the skulky brown doves that are a little boring for some birders. I love this kind of birds, but this bird hadn't been found since the 70s. So we were very interested in going to Perijá. You can see the dot there in the map in between Colombia and Venezuela. And the other one was the Perijá metaltail. Metaltail is a type of a small hummingbird, and this thing, had been only described from the Perijá Mountains in Venezuela and Colombia, a few specimens, and not seen since the 70s. So we wanted to do a little expedition, to go with some friends, do some plants, mammals, insects, and birds, and try to find these birds, or at least get more information. But what happened? We went up to the hill to do like the scouting trip. I went with a botanist that is actually the guy that is standing in the central photo with the trimmer, the cutting plants pole, and we were kidnapped, as is shown by this paper published in Science in 2004 by a little group of FARC, of this guerrilla of FARC, the Marxist guerrillas of the Fuerzas Armadas Revolucionarias de Colombia. What happened is that basically these guys really felt uncomfortable with our presence up there, because we were a couple of guys with a local guide. We had binoculars, we had field recorders, GPS devices, and they were basically running away from the army that was attacking them in the south. That was it was a combat in between the army and FARC, and they were escaping. And we came to their area, so they felt really uncomfortable and threatened by our presence. They thought at the beginning, and for a couple of weeks almost, that we were like military intelligence, or that we were their enemies, that were like right-wing paramilitaries. That is another of the angles of this conflict. So it took them a while, and they eventually realized, asking on our universities and checking documentation and stuff, that we were indeed, a teacher, a professor, a local guide, and that we were interested in birds and science. But eventually, this kidnapping, ended 88 days later, 3 months later. We were in the jungle, living in the Perijá Mountains, kidnapped by these guys for 3 months. What was happening during those days outside in the real world was pretty amazing and beautiful. And here is how kind of the cycle, kind of the circuit that I'm, presenting to you today starts to take shape. This is Bogota when we were kidnapped, and this is one of the Birding for Freedom campaigns. It was birders from all over Colombia, in the States, in several cities, in Spain, in Brazil, in Ecuador, that for a couple of mornings, they went birding for freedom, claiming for freedom. So this is Gary Stiles at the Universidad Nacional in Bogota, going birding with a lot of colleagues, and they had signs and they were all claiming for freedom. This is all some of the students of biology in the Universidad in Cali, another big Colombian city. These were some of my friends and family here in Medellin, going birding in a park nearby my university and having, signs and going to talk to the media, basically doing some, I would say, collective catharsis. Probably these demonstrations didn't really help that we came a little sooner, a little quicker out from our kidnapping, but they were integral part of the right that the community has to express. And this was one of the very first times that the birding community had like a common goal, let's call it like that, and they were expressing their discomfort about our kidnapping. Eventually, 3 months later, as I told you, we were brought back to freedom, and I kept doing my usual business. I finished my undergrad and in 2007, and I started actually doing birding tourism. So here I'm going to show you from those days, 2007 onwards. That is when I started my birding tours company, Colombia Birding, as Chris mentioned earlier. I'm going to show you some examples of some places that we started visiting with other companies, other local guides. I didn't discover these places where they have a common point, a common characteristic is that they were all very dangerous places to go. And they started to get safer and safer and safer around mid-2000s. So, for example, this is Montezuma. This is in the Western Andes. It's a beautiful, amazing cloud forest. And as you can see here, it's a big family there. They are all family that are mixed with some of my clients from the US Fish and Wildlife Service, some good chaps I've got the fortune to travel with several times. And what happened is that if you didn't go to Montezuma back in the day, you didn't have option to see this couple of species. These are Banksia tanagers. The one in the top left is black and gold tanager, and the one in the lower right is gold ring tanager. They are both endemic of Colombia. They only live in the central and western Andes and Colombia. And these tanagers, before the year 2000, no one could go and see them because they only lived in areas where conflict was present. It was guerrilla area, it was paramilitaries area, you couldn't go and find them. But after 2007, 2005, when I started doing birding tourism, these families, like the one in Montezuma, they could start offering their services, opening their lodge, and people went and see these two species. Another example, for example, is the Llanos, is the eastern plains that we share with Venezuela. And my friend Chris Bell, that is my co-host in the Birder Show, that is one of the nice things we are doing right now. Actually, at the end of the talk, I'll send you the link so you can enjoy and subscribe to the show. It's pretty neat. We actually aired an episode yesterday. Here is Chris with some kids in the Llanos. And I love going birding to the Llanos because all the young people there knows their birds by name. They know natural history. The kids and the people in the Llanos is very natural, nature, natural history oriented. And going birding there is great. I always love it. And, you go to the Llanos not only to do birding, like seeing, the biggest colony of Orinoco goose that there is in the world. Almost 2,000 specimens live there together in these eastern Llanos, but also great mammals like the giant antbird. But I can tell you guys, going to the Llanos in 1995, in the year 2000, was very dodgy. A lot of paramilitary groups were spreading the area and doing their drug business stuff there in the area. So this is another of the areas that started opening up and getting open. Another example that I love is Me Too. In this photo, I'm in the right. My friend Sandra is in the left, and my friend Jorge is in the middle. And there are a couple of chaps that really are indigenous. These guys are Florencio and Miguel from Me Too. And Me Too is very important because nowadays you can go to Me Too and see, Guyana and Cock of the Rock. That is one of the charismatic, crazy, jewels that you want to come and see in places like Colombia. But what happened in Me Too in year 1998, Me Too, the capital of the Department of Opez, a departmental capital, like a state capital for you guys, it was taken by the guerrilla FARC. It was the only state capital that was taken by like almost 3 days by a guerrilla group. So the fact that these guys nowadays can show tourism, operate tourism, be guides, and get their income from showing birds to people talks a lot on how these areas have changed. These areas were impossible to visit, and nowadays, since probably, as I said, mid 2000s, they are open. My last example, I love it because it's Doña Dora. Doña Dora is this lady that is in the middle. Actually, in the episode that we aired yesterday on the Birder Show, we showed Doña Dora. So I'm gonna send you the link later because it's totally worth watching. She's a lovely lady that she's been selling empanadas in the side of the road. She's been, getting her family income from feeding, passengers, and basically she has a lot of feeders in her area, and special birds like scarlet and white tanager are one of the jewels that live there in this Pacific area. That we only share this species with Ecuador, and that's the Chocó biogeographical region that we share with Ecuador and Panama in the Pacific. Well, once I went to Doña Dora with Joe Church, one of my clients actually chasing hummingbirds. And this is, I don't know, back in, early 2010, 11. And the area was still a little funny. You have to really have good information. And it was apparently clean. And we got there and Doña Dora was very uncomfortable with her presence. She was not smiling. She was a little, like sad face. And then, we got there, we started watching the feeders and Doña Dora is looking in the streets, a little uncomfortable. And she grabs me from my t-shirt, like boom, inside her kitchen, suddenly. And then I said, hey, Doña Dora, let's take it easy, we can get to know each other a little slower, Basically, Doña Dora told me, like, get off here right now. There was an attack from guerrilla down the road yesterday, and I'm very scared because you guys could get in trouble. I don't want you or your clients getting in trouble. So we, of course, totally, agree with her and we left. And like this photo is years later. I did a second trip, actually a third trip with Joe, and we didn't need to go for hummingbirds at Doña Dora because we'd seen them already. But Joe told me, man, let's go to Doña Dora. Let's go to say hello. Let's go to eat empanadas. Let's go to do a little bit of birding, even there's no new hummingbirds for me there. But, several years before, Doña Dora had saved us from a problematic situation or a dangerous situation. So, that this shows you guys how all these places have basically, changed, evolved for the better of the country. So doing tourism also took me again to the Eastern Andes, to these same mountains. Look at the big mountain, red mountain in the background. That's Cerro Pintado. That's the Eastern Andes. That's Perijá, where I was kidnapped. And basically, I went back to the mountain because, I got some clients that wanted to go to Perijá, and Perijá was totally safe. This photo is from 2016, I think, is the first time I went to this area after I was kidnapped. 12 years later, after so many friends, so many colleagues, so many clients had already gone. And one of the cool things is that we went up there also with friends to film The Birders. The Birders is a documentary. You can go online on YouTube. And actually, I think Chris has all these links. He can pass them on the chat later. And The Birders is a documentary about birding in Colombia, using culture, using music, using indigenous communities, and of course, birds. And it's showing you, that Colombia is changing. At the end of the documentary, actually, there is a little bit of my kidnapping story that we kind of use to show that the country is changing for the good. So shooting The Birders up there was very entertained. We went birding, we compare these are my original field notes from when I was kidnapped. I had to do this hidden on my tent using a headlamp or a candle. The guerrillas wouldn't allow me to take any notes. They were afraid of the security, I guess. And one of the cool things filming The Birders documentary is that, the cameraman, the producer, the director, everyone got so interested and keen on birds that nowadays there are birders. Even Keith Latsinski, my co-star there, and Juliancho, the videographer, the guy that is with the hat behind the screen in the back, they go birding every weekend. There are birders right now, and that's why we're actually doing the Birder Show, because at the office everyone got to be a birder, and we enjoy it so much that we're kind of making a little bit of a living out of this. But basically, one of the beautiful things that happened is that we made the birders, and I was like having a lot of encounters with these areas where I was kidnapped and stuff. But when we signed the peace deal in 2016, the government put a lot of money into investigation, into research. They said, okay, we got 10,000 guerrilla members out of the jungle. These areas are now free to go. These areas are clean to go. So what are the natural secrets that these areas had been hiding? What are the new species? What are the range extensions? What is all the potential that we have there that we never knew of because of the conflict? So the government puts a lot of money in a set of 20 expeditions, Colombia Bio expeditions. And I was privileged, fortunate to participate in the very last one, almost the very last one, the number 18 of 20 in Anorí. Anorí is a municipality north of Medellin, just 3 hours north of here, but one of the most unexplored terrains in Antioquia. And this was a regular expedition. Biologists going collecting plants, insects, herpetiles, froggies, just sampling the fauna and flora. We found a lot of new stuff. We found a new mouse for science, a mouse without a name, in 2018. This is crazy. We found new orchids. We have found new palms for science. We found a lot of orchids, a lot of insects, several good birds, nothing new for science. But the best thing is depicted in this little print screen of a National Geographic article that I'm also passing you the link on the links that Chris is sending you. And it says, after decades of war, the jungle is now open for exploration. But the best and most important part for me is what says on the subtitle, and is that we were guided by ex-FARC combatants, from our guerrilla. And what happened is that we went. Actually, you can read it if you go to this tiny CC, but Chris is sending you the full link. No worry about that. And the best thing is that we went with these guys because we wanted them to be part of the investigation, of the exploration. These are all cool birds like striolated mannequin. These are the guys from FARC and the guys from the university setting up some traps for mammals. This is, the snake, session every night was very entertained. Everyone is, interested or afraid of snakes. But one of the cool things in this photo is not the snake. One of the cool things and the most powerful thing of this photo, guys, is the faces of the people behind. They're all curious, clean-minded, beautiful people. But the thing is that in this photo, you have researchers, you have international observators from India, you have ex-combatants from a Colombian guerrilla, you have professors from a public university, you have young students from a private university, you have the assistant of the mayor of a town. They were all together. We were all together as a community, as Colombians. We didn't give a penny about who was who. We were just all biologists there. We were all naturalists. We were researching. And, if I show you this photo, I can tell you this girl is named Yesenia. And, I can ask you, who's Yesenia? And a lot of you are going to say, oh, she's, a biology young student. She likes bats. She's working with bats. She's mistangling a bat from a mistnet. She's, going to measure it, take a sample of blood and release it. Well, Yesenia is going to do all that, but Yesenia is not studying biology. Yesenia is a FARC ex-combatant. She was a guerrilla member. And Yesenia, it was only in 2018, 20 years old. She had been for 40 years in FARC. So she was even a minor of age when she was there. And this was the very first time that she had the opportunity to have a job where she was doing something, learning something from bats, but she was also showing us the trails that she knew very well. And she was earning some clean money for doing that. And I know we all take for granted that, we can go to school, we can have a job, we can earn our money, you can do a summer job. But have in mind, this girl joined FARC because she didn't have any opportunities. She didn't have any other chance. She was basically running from intrafamiliar violence. And when she ran away from her home in the mountains, she didn't find, the fire department. She didn't find, the church. She didn't find the mayor's office. She found an armed group camping outside, and that was the way for her to run away from whatever situation she was having. She didn't have opportunities, and now she was having an opportunity. That's the powerful thing of this photo. And then in this same photo, you have Sarita, and I could tell you Sarita is also an ex-FARC combatant. Sarita is not. Sarita is a biology student from, I mean, she's already graduated a long time ago, but she was a biology student from a very, very upscale private university. Sarita has been privileged as hell, you know, fortunately for her. And I really, really applaud that. She never had to think if she could study in this university or this because of the cost. She had her life a little bit, you know, guaranteed in the economical and opportunities aspect of it. But then Sarita, in this expedition, she's measuring their atomic crested tanager with a caliper, but she also had tons of opportunities to go speaking with El Barbao, with Juanca, the guy that is on her right, looking at the book. And Juanca is a guerrilla ex-combatant. They had the most amazing of the times. They could be sitting at a misnet, waiting for birds to be captured on the misnet, and having periods of 30 minutes to talk about life, to talk about why Juanca joined a guerrilla group 30 years ago. Juanca being able to ask her how it is to not having to think about money to go to university. If you have money for your transportation or for your food, going to school, you know, all these aspects of opportunities. And that's what the Expedición Bio provided. We didn't only got to see amazing birds. That's myself with Juan Calbarbao working on birds in the misnet. That's himself super proud of the bird that he got out of the misnet. So these guys were having opportunities for the very first time. And this photo for me kind of summarizes what Expedición Bio was. Sarita, you know, the private, privileged private university's biology student taking a photo through my scope of a bird. And in the right, there is an ex-combatant, Leo. And in the left, there is a young campesino, a young peasant, a young countryside person that actually works on the, let's say, political organization of his rural area. And actually the guy in blue, his family was victim of the armed actions of the guy in yellow. And they were together, working with Sarita. And what is joining them? What is getting them together? Birds, a bird that was in that scope. And, you know, birds show that they have this power. This is the photo we took on the very last day of the expedition in the field. And there were probably 30 of us there. And, you know, you can't tell me who is a researcher, who's a student, who's a filmmaker, who's an ex-guerrilla combatant, who's the assistant of the major, who is from Italy, from Italy or from India and is an UN international observer. You can tell me who is who. I mean, this is Colombia. It's a mixture of people. And in this case, we were all driven by nature and by birds. And that was the cool thing about the expedition. We brought these guys also to the lab so they knew how we process the specimens, how we sample DNA, and all these things that probably were not going to be useful for their life. But what happened is that we took them to, you know, a classroom one day at one of the universities here in the city. And here I am with my friend Paulo in the right in the board. We were the ornithologists, the birders in the expedition. And this was, guys, the very first time that a lot of these ex-combatants had the chance to sit on a classroom. I mean, they never went to school. A lot of them only went to first, second, third primary grade. But a lot of them were, for very first time in their lives, sitting on a chair, having a, you know, a screen of a board and being in class, because they never got those opportunities. These are the guys at the end of the expedition in an auditorium in front of 500 people showing the results of the expedition. And this is Anderson. Anderson was the ex-commandant, like the top guy of that guerrilla section. He went with us. And here is, you know, with his little glasses, very nerdy, trying to read the names of these new species for science: Pleurotalis, Epidendrum, different orchids. And I do much prefer Anderson trying to do this than Anderson doing this. This is Anderson 20 years ago, 10 years ago, before the peace deal, fighting for his ideas. You know, I'm not gonna say he was doing the right, he was doing the wrong. He was, you know, totally convinced that was the way to fight. But I prefer this Anderson, you know, just curious, like a kid, like a young kid, you know, looking for palms, looking for birds, looking for flowers, and understanding life in a different way. Basically, guys, to finish this talk, I want to share you A second experience that I have that is more recent. I was one of the organizers in Colombia of Global Big Day, this big event that each May we do, especially in the New World. And there is kind of a race in between countries, which country sees the most birds. And I was one of the main organizers 2017, 18, and 19. And basically, I came to a place to meet with some special people. And when I'm going to tell you who was these special people, but when I got to their community, I saw this poster in the left already, sticked in the restaurant of this community, and it was Global Big Day. It was like, we are doing Global Big Day, and I was like, what the hell? Birds already came here. Birds are already here, and this is what I found. Ceci, it was one of the birders at this place that I went to visit. And this place I went to visit is the Rain Corporation camp, the temporal place where the ex-combatants from FARC were living when they came out of the jungle. They gave up the arms and they were clustered, let's say, in camps, almost 1,000 people camps in some cases. And nowadays, those camps are like little towns, they develop and they have grocery stores and they have schools and stuff. I went there because I wanted to meet with the very same guys that kidnapped me, the very same ex-combatants that kidnapped me. So I got there, and the first person I met is Ceci. Ceci is an ex-combatant. She was not in the group that kidnapped me. She was in a different group back then in 2004, but she was already a birder when I came to visit in 2018. And this is because local birders already had gone there. And these guys were already into birds. That's Ceci writing notes and doing stuff on her bird book. And this is the area where they live. This is, the temporal camp. They have a lot of plants and, a lot of, let's say, made a little cozier their home. But I got the chance and the opportunity to meet with people like Eileen. Eileen was indeed, when I was kidnapped in 2004, Eileen was indeed in the lines of FARC. And I remember her with her AK-47, guarding me, at night. She was one of the guerrilla ex-combatants. But nowadays, 15 years later, I had the opportunity to go and see how the peace deal is treating her. I had the opportunity to go and hear from her how's the garden of vegetables going. She's the director of all the, gardening in the temporal camp. She has a kid, as you can see in this photo. She has roots now. She has the right to live in an area and get dreams and be able to have a family. And we went birding together with some of these guys to the Perijá Mountains, to the very same mountains where I was kidnapped with them. And we went with a bunch of people. And again, in this photo, you don't know who is who. I can tell you, there are filmmakers there. There are European tourists that were birders. There are local guides from town and local guides from the ex-guerrilla group. It's me. It's a lot of people mixed there, just with the pretext, with the only intention of watching birds. And we all shared a common interest and, of course, a common history. Some of these guys kidnapped me back in 2004. Now, in 2019, we were watching birds together. And basically, guys, that's how birds have this power to connect people. And I really appreciate you could stay, for, 40, 45 minutes here. Thank you very much for attending. And of course, any questions that Chris wanna, direct and go ahead with, I'm more than pleased to respond. Don't be shy. I have also, to thank a lot of people for all the material that I use here, a lot of photos, a lot of videos. So thank you very much. I guess I stop sharing my screen. There you are.
One of the ways that deaf people clap or is raising their hands like that. So if you're
there you are.
And you thought that was cool, raise your hand and shake them, because I pretty.
Thank you very much.
Okay, I thought that was amazing, and I remember hearing something like this when I was in Colombia with you in Manizales, and what, 400 or 500 people. They all stood up and they all started crying because this was their story, their exact story. And the truth is, it's all of our story, because we're all humans together. So thank you for sharing that, and I really appreciate it. The question that I hear so commonly is it safe? is it safe to travel there, Diego? What do you say?
Oh, absolutely, mate. Absolutely. I have to be honest. We still have our non-go areas. Some corners of the country still have a lot of issues, especially with drug trafficking. Is a problem we're going to have, and several other Latin American countries are going to have until a lot of European and North American consumers stop consuming illegal drugs. That's or it's legalized. That's the other thing. But I would say 90% of the country is trouble free to move around. All the central Andes area, all the Caribbean, and that's absolutely a total obvious thing by the number of tourists, not only birders, that we've been having on the last 10 years. Tourism is multiplied by several numbers, and if you come with local people that will tell you where not to go, and not take you to some of the borders with Panama, with Ecuador, with Venezuela are still a little dodgy. You will be in perfect shape. I mean, no problem. It's safe to come. Yeah.
Okay. So let's just say I wanted to go on a trip right now. How do I make that happen? I want to go birding in Colombia. What are the steps I need to take? How much money do I need to save up? How long should I go? I want to go on a birding trip to Colombia. Help me get started. What do I do?
Well, there is no, I mean, there is not much difference to any other international birding trip. And basically, what you have to do at the beginning is plan your stuff. So you either take a trip that is offered to Colombia by several of the international birding tour companies, the big ones, the small and the medium-sized ones that are offering in our country. Probably more than 50 international birding tours company are doing it. Or even better, you take a trip with one of the local operators, Colombian birding tour companies and guides that are easily more than 50. A lot of them are going to have pre-arranged setup departures with itineraries and stuff. Normally it's for 1 week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, depending on how long you want to spend here. But as we were conversating one day, Chris, like, if you want to see all Colombia, you have to come at least for, I don't know, like 5 trips, 3 weeks each. So basically, if you want to do like a full Colombia glimpse, let's say, you have to allow you for 3 weeks, a couple of in the Andes, like a circuit doing the 3 Cordilleras, the 3 ranges, and 1 week in the Caribbean. Then how much a trip like this costs? It depends on your preferences. Myself, for example, I normally do private tours. So a lot of times I have only one client, or 2 clients. For one client, it's pretty expensive. One of these trips could be, I don't know, $450 per day. All included, of course, but it could be 400, 500 because it's only one person paying for all the expenses. But normally these are groups of 6 to 10 people, and the cost can come down to around $200-ish per person per day. Of course, this is going to vary depending on the areas you visit. If you're visiting upscale poshy lodges or more normal, out of the beaten track hotels and lodges and small fincas. And all the services you contract. But Colombia, I would say it's pretty easy and open for international visiting birders because we have so many options. You can come any time of the year. You're not restricted to a season because any time of the year, almost anywhere around the country is going to be good birding. Some areas in the Amazon, in the Llanos, the ones that have the high and low, water levels for the river need to be visited on the drier months to make birding easier. But Colombia has a little bit of birding everywhere for everyone. So options are many. I would say that the most important is, even if you come with an international company or will you come with local people, make sure that these international companies are using local operators, local fixers. So you are in good hands, and also you leave the money with the local communities where, it should be supporting the real conservation, the real social change.
Right. Yeah, when I went down to Colombia with you, I was invited to that South American Bird Festival. And when they first invited me, I said, I don't know Spanish and I don't know your bird. So what would I have to offer? They said, you know American tourists and ecotourism, so share some of that. And I was so excited to share about what Americans want, and talking to the people there, there were hundreds of people that said, I just started a little hotel. I just started a little bird watching tour.
Yeah,
I just did this.
everywhere.
They were so excited. And the thing that was impressive to me was we run this bird festival in Morro Bay, and Rosemary and I are involved in it. And we are some of the youngest people at our bird festival. When we were at your bird festival in Colombia, we were the oldest people. Everyone
Indeed.
was younger than us.
Indeed, very young audiences here.
Children and teenagers, and they knew all their birds in the scientific name, and like Fernet knew them all in French as well as in English. So tell us a little bit more about children and teens, and how Colombia has encouraged birding through their community.
Well, that's pretty interesting what you mentioned, because we are quite unique, and I would say quite also endemic on the way our birding community has grown. We were isolated from the rest of the world. No one was coming here, from the 50s to all the way almost to the beginning of 2000 to do research, to do sampling for bird studies, to do tourism. So our community grew up organically and very domestically. And what happens is that, birding here also has cultivated the young audiences, because it's a really cool way to get you connected with nature. And a lot of these people that lives in rural areas finds bird a perfect link in between, their daily lives in the farm and an additional hobby they can do, or eventually, now that we have tourism, additional job they can do, that is guiding, birding, operating tours, etc. So the advance in the last 10 years, I would say, of technology, having eBird, having participative science, having field guides in your cell phone, having connectivity. We are an Andean country, crazy topography. So we have a lot of cell phone towers. It's like, 10 times better connection here for mobile coverage than in the United States, no doubt, So all that has also got the attention and captivated all these young audiences. And nowadays there are like birding clubs for kids. Like in the last event, on the Manizales event that you guys attended, a few years ago, even some friends made a bird camp. And they have, 20 kids going to the bird camp, attending the talks, going birding, doing, a fire with marshmallows at night, and just having fun. So the local communities here are super strong. We have a ton of people interested in birds. And I think also has a little bit to do that a lot of the birding here in the 80s and let's say 90s was done by scholars, by academic people that was birding because of science, because of their job at the universities. And then suddenly when this was spread to the more general audience, it was like, boom, what a new cool thing to do. And it just got popular, and it's getting more and more popular. That's one of the things we're actually trying to, get people more keen about it with the Birder show, is that birding is fun, accessible, easy, cool. It's not for nerdy, old aunties. It's for everyone, it's for even aunties that are not nerd and young chaps that are nerd, and everyone is just welcome to birding, and that's what we're trying to show there.
Right. And then Nikki and Mauro went around to the schools and had everybody signing that birding pledge and singing songs and dancing around. That was pretty exciting to see that too. Someone says, okay, that sounds like a pretty good time to go to Colombia to go birding, but boy, those are tall mountains. And what if I'm like 83 years old? Am I going to be able to go on a trip like that? It sounds exciting, but is it going to be safe, and is it going to be possible for me to do it when I'm old and maybe can't?
Oh, yeah, I understand. In Colombia, like in many other countries, you can do the two, ends of the spectrum. You can do like a super hardcore, crazy hiking, climbing, birding trip, or you can do like relax and easy, slow pace, super cool lodges, feeders, birding trip. So, I actually recommend you to watch our recent episodes of the Birder Show, where we have 3 episodes on Caldas, that is the area you guys visited. And we aired the first one of Valle del Cauca yesterday, and there are 2 more coming. And you can see how accessible these places are. They're all, 1 hour away from the main city. These cities all have flight connections with Bogota. Everything is 1 hour or less than 1 hour flight, because this is not a huge country. And then a lot of these places you reach, by car. You're birding there on the feeders. There are some easy trails to go. The feeding of the birds is gotten a little crazy actually in the last year. So it's not only bananas and for tanagers and toucans and sweet water with sugar for hummingbirds. It's also worms for ant pitas. So really crazy skulky birds like ant pitas, these eggs with long legs that jump in the forest that were impossible to see. Now, even if you don't want to spend a lot of energy, like hiking all day long and playing back tapes, you can go and sit on a bench and your guide will come, like put some worms there, and an ant pita comes out, you take photos and everyone's happy, So yeah, it's pretty easy, it's accessible. There are several of these places that even have facilities for people with disabilities. There is recently one of the birding routes, relatively, new in Cali area, that has Braille language and has some app that you can have a narrator telling you how's the landscape, what are the birds that they are listening. And a lot of these places also will feed people on wheelchairs or with some comfort for people that is not totally able to go on trails and stuff. So yeah, absolutely, there are things that you have to have in mind. If you have a little bit of discomfort with elevation, with altitude, don't go birding one day sea level and next day, 10,000 feet above sea level that you can do in Colombia. But, tell your guide you need to do it slowly, climbing up, getting acclimatized. And it's completely possible to do comfy birding in Colombia.
Right. Or you just stop at the little cafe on the side of the road and have coca tea, which I think we did when we were looking for that. Yeah. There's that little hummingbird up in the
Buffy,
helmet crested something or other.
Yeah, Rosemary, Buffy helmet crest, yeah. Endemic.
And that Panatel. That's 14,000. That's like 14,000 feet up. That's way the heck up there for to look at a hummingbird.
Freezing cold, but they specialize in the high Andes. That's where the center of origin of the hummingbirds is, the high Andean elevations. And so, every different habitat up there in the Andes has its own different endemic hummingbird.
Wow. We also stopped at one place where there were hummingbird feeders. And can you tell me just roughly how many kinds of hummingbirds you have in Colombia?
Well, I'm going to be
Are there 10?
I'm going to be bragging again.
Yeah, go ahead.
How many species of hummingbirds do you think we have in Colombia?
Well, wait. How many species of hummingbirds? Some birders, Bob or Jeanette. How many species of hummingbirds can you see here in California? Jeanette, are you on?
That's a good one.
Somebody shout out. How many?
I'm guessing 10.
10. We got 10.
That's a good number.
Okay. So
now you multiply your 10 species.
I'm gonna guess you have 40 hummingbirds.
You multiply your 10 Californian species by 35, and that's the total hummingbirds there are in the New World. There is around 350 species. From those, we have 160-ish hummingbirds. We are the #1 country in hummingbird diversity also. And it's an incredible, crazy number. They are occupying every single different niche, every single different habitat, from the desert, coastal, lowlands to the super high paramos, as you have mentioned.
Right. Now, Bob, our co-host, said that we're going to have another presentation in a few weeks about someone who did a big year or something. What about Bob? What was that? 700 birds he saw in a big year.
That over 700, just over 700
in the North America. Yeah. Okay. So that is a lot of birds. 700 birds. Diego,
in a full year, yeah.
How many birds could you see if you were serious about it in Colombia?
Normally, if you come for a 3-week trip and you go a little, not super hardcore, but like seriously doing birding, visiting different, that typical one I mentioned, 2 weeks in the Andes, 1 week in the Caribbean, you see those 700 species in 3 weeks here.
Wow.
That's going a little too birdy. I mean, like, you know, every day smashing it.
How many species in Colombia?
Almost 2,000, and the number is growing because we're finding new species for science. We are visiting remote corners of the country and finding new additions from Ecuador, from Brazil, from Peru, from everywhere. And also we are actually, as our country is so complicated, when you study a species, you split it, you know, you smash it in pieces, and from one species, you say, this thing's different to this, so there are 4 species. And, you know, those splits also really bring us numbers to Colombia.
Right. Okay, let me see if I have any. Okay, how many species did you see in on your global big day?
I played Global Big Day only 3 years, 2006, 17, 18, and 19.
Yeah.
And I think the one that I saw the most was like 160 species. And actually, I wasn't doing a big day. Because if you want to do a big day, you plan like an elevational gradient. You start, you know, in the Paramo, and then you visit the cloud forest and the lower forest and the desert, and then you cover all these habitats, and you know, you get 250, 300 species for the day. But our strategy was covering specific corners of the country, so all the endemics and all the rare birds could be added to Colombia Global Big Day. So Colombia has been winning the Global Big Day since 2017. I don't remember the numbers, but we've been reporting as a country like 14 or 1,500 species on a day. I mean, that's like 80% of the avifauna of the country sample seen in a single birding day. So that's pretty cool and remarkable too.
That is pretty cool. Well,
Yeah.
we're gonna wrap up. I got a feeling there are some people on this call that would like to go on a trip to Colombia. So we will try to put something together. What do you think would be, if I had to do 1 month, what is November a good month?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, like you think if you're going to do the classical, you know, 1 or 2 weeks in the Andes and 1 week in the Caribbean, you want to avoid August, let's say, because August is normally dry and windy, so it's a little tougher to get good views of the birds in the Andes, especially. But you know, November is perfectly a good month. Anytime in between, like November and March, April, is pretty cool. I mean, like it depends on the areas, of course, but almost any time year round is gonna be neat.
Okay. Well, thank you, Diego. We really appreciate it. All of you, if you're not familiar with the chat function, you can look in the chat. I think you can, it's usually down at the bottom of your screen. You might even be able to print the chat. Bob Ravel, if you could print the chat for us or save that chat, and we'll post it someplace. There are a bunch of links in there, all those links to different things that that Diego was involved with. We really appreciate your time. Thank you very much. And we hope to see you there one day. Bob, do you have any closing remarks about the Bird Festival? Our Bird Festival is coming up, sheesh, in about, what, 5 weeks or so? And we expect, I think there's a little over 700 people registered. And we look forward to having a good time with all of you. We're going to have a big day with 100 birds. And and maybe we'll get a trip up to Colombia. Thank you, Diego. I really appreciate it. Everyone else would thank you if their mics were turned on, but we really appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, everyone. Cheers. Have a good day.
Okay.
All right. I'm going to unmute everybody.